All right. Hello, my friends. It looks like we are live. Welcome, welcome. I am here to talk about one of my very favorite topics, and that is how to leverage your introvert strengths to raise more money. And the context of our conversation today specifically is all about major gifts. So I'm looking forward to our chat. So as I get set up and settled in, I want to hear from you. If you're joining us, welcome. I'd love to hear where you are joining us from. So I'm going to ask you if you can drop your name and location. Let us know where you're joining from into the comments below. I always love to see who's here for these live sessions. Just getting my video adjusted here a little bit. It's been one of those days, busy, busy. So if we haven't met yet, I want to introduce myself. My name is Emma Luzzi, and I work with major gift fundraising teams to help them develop the skills, the systems, and the strategies they need to meet your ambitious campaign goals. And one of the reasons that I'm here talking about this topic today is that I am an introvert myself. So I identify as an introvert. I also have more than 25 years of frontline fundraising under my belt. So I can talk a little bit about what it's like to be an introverted major gift fundraising and the ways in which our strengths actually loan themselves very, very well to fundraising in general and specifically major gifts. So if you are just joining us, let me know where you're joining from so I can say hello. I see Nicola. Hi, Nicola, Sammy, Tracy. All right. Hello, everybody. Okay. Welcome, welcome. Go ahead if you're just joining us. Michaela, Sharon. Hello, everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Go ahead and introduce yourself as you join in. And one of the fun things, if this is your first time joining me on one of these live videos, is that it is totally interactive. So I'm going to ask you along the way to weigh in. I'm going to ask your perspective. You're also welcome to drop any questions that you have in the comments below. And if you're catching up on the replay, welcome, and go ahead and use the hashtag replay. I know not everyone can necessarily join us in person, so you're very welcome if you're catching up on the replay. A few more folks joining. Emily, Kay, Helen. Hello, everybody. All right, so I want to start off by talking a little bit about what I'll call my introvert journey. And I've often identified myself as what I'll call a reluctant introvert. And here's what I would find that would happen. As somebody who's very dedicated to personal development, I've done, all of the personal strengths assessments, Myers-Briggs, True Colors, you name it, I've done it. And every time I did them, I land firmly in the introvert camp. And I've always found myself sort of struggling or rebelling against that a little bit. And upon reflection, I think the reason why is this. I think that there are a lot of myths and misunderstandings about introverts, right? A lot of those that I don't personally identify with. For example, introverts, we're always quiet, like Susan Cain's book, the title of Susan Cain's famous book about introverts. We as introverts really hate networking, right? We don't like to network. So I think that those are some of the myths and misperceptions that have made me oftentimes like misunderstand and rail against this identity as an introvert. And what's really helped me is actually embraced what I bring to the table as an introvert. Because what I found over time is that oftentimes the extrovert ideal is so embedded in our Western culture that oftentimes I'd find people, wanting to fix me or change me into more of an extrovert. Instead of actually recognizing as an introvert, I bring a unique and valuable set of strengths to the table when it comes to fundraising, especially when it comes to major gifts. So that is the topic of our conversation today. We're going to talk about the exact strengths that you already have that are very, very valuable that you can lean on and leverage when it comes to your fundraising. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. And I am going to start with Topic number one, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the fact that introverts are really strong at one-to-one meetings. Okay, introverts are very strong one-to-one in general. And for those of us who are in major gifts, you will know that the one-to-one meeting and one-to-one relationship building is absolutely the gold standard of major gift fundraising. And we as introverts are very, very well positioned to do this. There's a couple of reasons why we are really good at one-to-one relationship building in one-to-one settings. And one of the top reasons is that we are active listeners. One of the strengths we're really good at, one of the skills that tends to come naturally for us as introverts, is that we're active listeners. What this means is that we're really good at building relationships and helping donors feel seen, understood, and valued, because we're really good at listening our way to the gift, right? So if you've been following me for a while, you may have heard me talk a little bit about the concept and mistake I see a lot of organizations making that I call the information fire hose. And that is when you're really bombarding the donor with information and stats and your words and your numbers. And we're trying to persuade the donor with basically just like an influx of information that's pointed at them. And that is not our natural tendencies as introverts, right? We aren't necessarily going to go into the one-to-one meeting with the pitch mindset, with the idea that we're going to talk this person into making a gift. And that's why we're actually so strong at the one-to-one relationships. We're able to actively listen. We're able to ask really great questions. We're able to use and hone that skill of curiosity, also a really great strength that introverts tend to bring to the table. We're able to put that to use to really ask great questions and really get to the heart of what motivates the donor, what they're interested in, what their deeper values are. And this is all what I'm describing right now, truly advanced major gift relationship building work. So you might notice I'm very passionate about this. Don't ever let anybody tell you that, or try to turn you into an extrovert, or tell you that introverts are not good at major gift fundraising, especially frontline fundraising, because our skills actually enable us to do very advanced relationship building work, listening carefully to the donor, asking great questions, getting curious, diving deeper into values, diving deeper into donor motivation. And all of that always outweighs the pitch and the information fire hose when it comes to landing more major gifts. So I want to say, can I get an amen right now? I feel like I'm on my soapbox. But who else identifies with this real strength once you're able to get one-to-one with donors? Who else has noticed that they've got a real strength in terms of creating and building deep relationships, using those skills of active listening, using those skills of curiosity and great questions? I want to hear from you if this is something that you're also really good at. One other thing I'll add while you're sharing in the comments is that I think that introverts typically often tend to be as well highly attuned to something that sometimes goes over the heads of a lot of extroverts. No offense to our extrovert friends out there, you're good at lots of things. But what happens is introverts tend to be really good, especially one-to-one, in terms of being highly attuned to subtle nuances. Like typically that may include body languages or using pauses, facial expressions. They're very tuned in and typically tend to be quite observant. I think part of that is because, right, like we do have a very rich internal life typically as introverts, and we tend to be very good at kind of reading what's going on with the donor using nonverbal cues, right? Again, nothing is always true across the board for everybody, but this does tend to be a strength that definitely a lot of introverts bring to the table. So meeting one-to-one with donors, we've talked a little bit about why this is one of your superpowers. It's because you are great active listeners. It's because you are really good at cultivating curiosity, asking great questions, diving deeper to uncover donor values and motivation. And also you tend to be observant and highly attuned to subtle cues that may not necessarily be picked up by somebody who's much more extroverted, for example. Those subtle cues can actually really help you when it comes to building those relationships and understanding more about donor values and motivations. All right, my friends, so let me ask you this. Have you noticed this too? Have you noticed, and I think introverts are sometimes not necessarily very good at patting ourselves on the back. So I'm going to ask you right now, are these strengths that you've also noticed in your one-to-one meetings? And is there anything I've missed that actually makes you really good in terms of your one-to-one relationship building with donors? I want you to go ahead and drop that in the comments. Like I said, a big part of this fun is actually that we're all together as introverts and having this opportunity to share and hear about other people's experience as well on the front lines. So go ahead and let me know, challenge those introvert tendencies to want to not necessarily be the first to speak, and get into those comments and let me know. Do you notice that these strengths also make you good at one-to-one meetings? And is there anything that I've actually missed? All right. This is a great observation. I love this. Recently had the privilege of visiting donors for one-on-ones. Although apprehensive, I was surprised at what an amazing time I had. Yay. And I think, hearing about stories and motivations behind givings, and also like getting out of that pitch mode and actually going into active listening mode, so powerful, and something that our strengths loan themselves really well to. Making the space for donors to feel heard and actively listen. You are describing some of the strongest superpowers, I think, of major donors, Sharon, that is something that makes us really, really good at the one-to-one meeting piece. So I love hearing about that experience. I've had a very similar experience. In fact, I started out working more as a fundraising generalist. And when I thought a lot more about how I might like to focus, I felt like my heart was really in the one-to-one work with donors, which I really felt like loaned itself well to major gifts, because that's where I really felt not only did I thrive in terms of my strengths and my skills, but it's also where I brought a really unique and valuable set of abilities to the table for the organizations I worked with. So let us know what your experience is with that. And also, like, maybe you have some challenges getting to the one-to-one meetings. I've heard that from introverts before. I love the one-to-one meetings, but I really have a challenge actually getting over, my dislike of using the phone to get the one-to-one meeting booked. So that might resonate with you as well. Francis is sharing. Yeah, definitely, Francis. Important to meet with donors and give them a chance to explain what's important to them. That is foundational part of major gift fundraising for sure. And that's going to be a really important way that you can use that introvert superpower. All right. So let's move on to superpower number 2. I spent a bit of time on superpower number 1 just because it's such a good one. And you'll hear me contrast and compare our skills and strengths with extroverts sometimes as well. And again, that is not to malign our extroverted colleagues. In fact, I often say one of like the greatest teams, speaking of superpowers, one of the greatest teams is actually an introvert and an extrovert together on a call, because you can balance each other out, right? The extrovert might have a bit of a tendency to go into pitch mode. The extrovert might have a tendency to talk a little too much and listen too little. Whereas as introverts, we can really balance that out, but we can lean on our extrovert colleagues if we are in places that are a little more out of our depth, like very large donor events, for example. We can lean on our extroverted colleagues to support us in a context like that. All right, so I want to talk about superpower number 2, which is a strength that loans itself to our fundraising in several different ways. And that is that introverts tend to have an ability for deep focus and concentration. All right. Again, nothing is always true across the board, but we do, compared to our extroverted colleagues, tend to be able to kind of like settle into a task, really focus on it and get deep into it. And it might also be because we have a fairly rich internal life that we're able to do that. And that deep focus and concentration can loan itself well to your work in a couple of different ways. I'll actually start by talking about the context of being at a very large donor event, for example. That was a place where I would sometimes feel a little bit out of my depth because I know I'm really good one-to-one. I do find it more challenging to be kind of dealing or working with like hundreds of donors at the same time. And this is where I found it really advantageous to tap into the skill and ability that I have as an introvert for that deep focus and concentration. And I would do it in this way. I would be able to, for example, meet a donor, and even if we were just speaking for a couple of minutes, I was able to use my focus to kind of block out the rest of the busyness that was happening in the room and really laser focus on the conversation I was having with the donor. So oftentimes I would sometimes even feel like it would get to the point where, you know, the rest of the room could sort of, and noise and distraction could melt away. And I could actually sort of create a little bubble with the donor and I, just to make them feel like they were the only person in the room. And it's a superpower I haven't actually heard shouted out very often. And I'm going to contrast it, for example, with the extroverts, who are very good, again, valuable skill, at sort of hopping from donor to donor, for example. So they'd be great to help introduce you, make connections in the big events. And where I found I was really good is just being able to like deeply focus on what one donor was saying, and really making them feel, again, heard and like they were the only person in the room, even though we were in a very large and busy context. So it's a unique strength. I don't think we talk about it enough, but our ability to be able to kind of deeply focus and concentrate in that way is a valuable one. And it's one that's increasingly scarce in the world, just given the nature of our world right now, the information we're bombarded with constantly, doom scrolling and social media. So being able to tap into the ability to focus and kind of tune out distractions is increasingly difficult, even for those of us for whom it is a strength. But I find recognizing it, if it is a strength for you, can be very important and valuable, because then you can actually think about purposely tapping into that in the context of your work. I'll use another very simple example in terms of fundraising. Right now, all of us are in the depth of year-end giving when I'm doing this live broadcast. We are all very, very busy with year-end giving. I haven't met an exception to that. And I think what will be very helpful for you at this time is that you're able to use that deep focus and concentration again to tune out what may be noise around what's your most important priorities right now this time of year. And for me, if you are in major gift fundraising, your most important priority is going to be continuing to build your relationship with your donors, possibly doing solicitations if the time is right for those donors. So being able to use this, what Emily is just calling this hyper focus, which can actually be also a strength of neurodivergence, but is also a strength of introversion, right? So this is really interesting that you noted that, Emily, that hyper focus, and then you can really use that to your benefit when it comes to both building your relationships with donors, especially in a busier context, but also when it comes to focusing on the right things, especially during busy times of year. So our beloved extroverted colleagues, I hope I'm not giving any of you a complex. What tends to happen is your strengths can sometimes make you a bit more vulnerable to shiny object syndrome. We've probably all worked with an extrovert who has a bit of shiny object syndrome, in that, you know, you're ideating a lot, you're hopping from idea to idea, you're looking for that new shiny object. That does tend to be, again, it can be a strength when used well on the extrovert side, but it can also turn into a weakness, the hopping around a lot and the not going deep when you need to go deep on a task, for example, or with a relationship with a donor. So this is where we truly can thrive and truly can shine, to be able to get that deep hyper focus. I love that what Emily mentioned, using that hyper focus to make sure that we are focusing on the right priorities, our most important priorities, and that we're able to tune out those distractions. What a superpower right now, right? What a superpower. I love this. All right, so let's see what else I wanted to talk about. We talked about laser focus. Oh my goodness, this time always flies by so quickly when we're together. So I'm going to move on to superpower number 3. We always keep these sessions to 30 minutes if you're new to us. So I'm going to turn into superpower number 3, because I don't want to run out of time to talk about how to take care of yourself during busy year end, when we might be a bit more susceptible to burnout as introverts. All right, so superpower number 3 I like to talk about is crafting irresistible donor giving opportunities. Okay, and here is why we are really good at that, right? Many of the things that I've already talked about loan into this, but introverts also tend to be very strong creative thinkers. Now, how many of you feel like that's a bit of a surprise? Oftentimes introverts don't think of themselves as creative, but introverts do tend to naturally have a creative streak. And that is often coupled with the ability to be thinking strategically, but not necessarily being rigid in that strategic thinking. So when we take the power of creativity and we couple that with strategic thinking and flexibility, what we get to me is like superpower in terms of crafting irresistible giving opportunities for our donors. And this looks a little bit like this, right? So you may have, let's walk through the whole introvert superpower process. You have met with your donor. You have used all of your amazing skills like active listening, super focus, curiosity, asking great questions, so that you truly are understanding the values and the motivations of that donor. Okay, so now what you can do is you can apply your amazing strengths of creativity and strategic thinking to actually be thinking, all right, how are we aligning this donor in a mutually beneficial way with a giving opportunity that also is advantageous for our organization? And that's really where creativity and strategic thinking can come in, is that we're really able to be like, okay, where does this donor fit? Where does this opportunity fit? Is there anything maybe that I've missed that might be a great opportunity to align them with? That you're thinking about and taking into account all of the factors that are really important in making a decision and putting together a proposal like this. You're also thinking about, how does this fit with the organization's priorities, right? How does this fit with what the organization wants and needs? So we tend as introverts to be very sophisticated thinkers around being able to do really advanced work on like that matchmaking piece. Not only the matchmaking piece around like, where does this donor fit, but also like being really creative in, again, a way that's very positive and very aligned with what the organization wants and needs and the organization's values. We're able to come up with and craft those really great offers that resonate a lot with the donors. So that's another one that may be a kind of a strength that we don't necessarily think or talk about a lot. Creativity, right? And creativity is a superpower, absolutely, and can loan itself well in terms of figuring out those irresistible giving opportunities. I'm just checking my notes quickly because I want to make sure I haven't missed anything. I skimmed over that last one a little bit just because I don't want to run out of time. But I hope everyone is getting the sense of the incredible natural strengths that you bring to the table when it comes to major gift fundraising. And why I think this is so important is, for so many of us, we're introverts living in an extrovert world. And what we tend to hear most is, here's how we need to fix you, and here's how you need to change. And my message for you today really is, You don't need to change. Our workplaces probably need to change, and our culture and sector needs to change. And what they need to do is start recognizing the natural strengths and abilities and skills that introverts bring to the table that make us super talented major gift fundraisers. All right, before I go, I had promised to talk with you a little bit more about how to protect your time. How to protect your time. I just totally stole my own thunder there, about how to make sure that you are taking care of yourself during this year end so that you don't burn out, because this is something that's really important for introverts to think about. As I start off with that, what I do want to hear from you, because we talked about a lot of strengths, I packed a lot of strengths into one very short period. I want to hear from you, what stands out for you most when you're thinking about the strengths that you bring to the table that make you really good at major gift fundraising. I just want to hear one strength that you bring to the table that's valuable, that could be one of your introvert strengths. So it could be something we've talked about, or it could be something I haven't talked about that is also an introvert strength. So go ahead and drop that in the comments below while I take a few minutes to talk about the importance of taking care of ourselves and making sure that we're managing our energy as introverts during this busy year-end season, because this is very important. Something I also discovered early on in my fundraising career is that as an introvert, I have very different needs than my extroverted colleagues, especially when it comes to downtime and rest. And this really hit home when I was working in healthcare, where we had a lot of donor events. We'd often have a lot of evening events. And what I would find is that I would have an evening event, it would go great. I'd have to be back in the office at 9 a.m., probably the first mistake on both of our parts there. And I would just be absolutely running on empty. And my extroverted colleagues would be bounding in and they'd be all excited about last night. No problem for them, but definitely a problem for me. And the simple fact is that introverts have different needs in terms of resting and recharging than our extrovert colleagues. You've probably heard about this, that extroverts tend to recharge in those very social contexts. They tend to recharge in being with other people. So it makes sense, coming back from a donor event, my extroverted colleagues are like full tank, feeling great. And then I, who had not had a chance to have downtime, quiet time, and recovery time, would be absolutely running on fumes and or copious amounts of coffee when it came to coming in right after an event. So recognizing that our needs are very different, and that there's nothing wrong with that. And quite frankly, you aren't going to change that even if you want to. So recognizing and embracing this is something that's really important. So when you think about recognizing that you have different needs for resting and recharging than your extrovert colleagues, you will not be able to fit your round peg into that square hole. That makes life a lot easier in terms of thinking about managing our time and creating the boundaries that we need to be healthy and rested and thrive at this time of year. The one thing I find that's made a really big difference for me, that I've just started getting really serious about this year, is creating buffer time in between meetings. I don't know about you, it's very easy to go back to back to back to back. And it's something that I would do previously during very busy times. And then I discovered, I wasn't serving myself well in terms of my own health and mental health. And I also wasn't serving my clients well when I was trying to schedule things back to back in that way, because, by kind of like the fourth or fifth meeting of that day, I was just not starting to be working at my best levels and delivering my best to the people I was working with. So I've done two things this year that's made such a difference for me. I've created and built in buffer times in between meetings. So half an hour buffer times between meetings. Nicola was onto this before I was, always adds buffer time, very wise. And I've also recognized that I actually max out at about 3 one-hour meetings. And so what I've done is created a system in which it's actually, I need to override it and I try not to. You actually can't book more than 3 meetings into one day through my online calendar. So I've created systems around myself that just support the time I need to recharge between meetings and recognize that after 3 hours, I'm not at my best. I truly will tell you, I don't think anyone's at their best after 3 hours of meetings. I think extroverts, introverts included. I think introverts feel it more deeply, not having the downtime and not having the recovery time. So if that is not possible for you, I know it can be very difficult, especially if you work in an environment filled with extroverts, you know, find ways that you can do it in small ways. You know, sometimes it feels like we don't have control over our calendar and our lives at work, but it can actually, there can be little ways that we can carve this out. And even talking like with your colleagues and or your manager and leaders, even talking about this with them can be really helpful, because oftentimes extroverts don't necessarily come into this knowing what our needs are for kind of resting and recharging and making sure that we don't burn out. So actually asking for what you need can be very beneficial. And I don't think a buffer time between meetings is too big an ask. And I think it benefits everybody, introverts and extroverts included. All right, I love this. I'm just chatting and I'm seeing in the comments, and I'm going to wrap up shortly, but I just wanted to come back to the comments, which are making me laugh, about being in our heads, right? Being in our heads. And there again is something that's really interesting, that introverts can be perceived as being in our heads. And I have actually started talking about this as having a rich internal life, because I feel like it sounds a little bit more positive than being in our heads. So, you know, having that rich internal life, which actually can be super beneficial, again, when it comes to many things, including creativity, including strategic thinking, all of these things are very beneficial. But like any strength, we actually do have to watch out it doesn't tip into a weakness. And you notice, for example, I've used that in terms of extrovert strengths as well. We can see that with extroverts, they're very good at working rooms, right? And that is perceived to be one of the most valuable strengths in terms of fundraising. I disagree, as you may get the sense. But you have to be careful. What can happen is that strength can tip into a weakness, right? And then what happens is that you're creating very many, very only surface level relationships by hopping around too much, right? So you're covering a lot of ground, but you're not necessarily going deep in the way that you need to build meaningful relationships. So we as introverts can also think about how our strengths sometimes can tip into weakness, either like through overuse or for example, like not necessarily like being super self-aware. I can totally identify with this. Emily, I love hearing this, that you're saying it's simple, but I'm no longer ashamed of shutting my office door for even 5 minutes just to quiet my head at work. And quite frankly, all of us need to be doing this. We are in such a busy environment, and we're losing the ability to actually do deep work and focused thinking. So all of us would really benefit around, how do we get that quiet time that we need to do the deep and strategic thinking and to be really proactive instead of reactive, right? And as introverts, that really is something that we bring many strengths to. So this is great. I am going to go ahead and actually wrap up now. What I do want to do is share with you how A, you can stay in touch with me, and B, you can hear about other live sessions like this coming up. I do these at least monthly. And you can keep up to date on those by subscribing to my newsletter, The Major Gift Insider. And you can find that at blueskyphilanthropy.com/subscribe. This has been such a rich and wonderful conversation. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, and I really wish we could stick around and keep talking about this, because I think it's wonderful. But my greatest hope for you is that we are wrapping up today, leaving you with a greater strength of all, a greater sense, pardon me, of all the amazing strength that you bring to the table. as an introvert, and that we're able to, in this world kind of really designed with extroverts, really lean into and leverage those strengths to, do great fundraising, but also to recognize that we have needs that are unique as well. And that in order to stay healthy and well and not burn out, especially this time of year, we also need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, that we're protecting our time, that we're having that kind of downtime that we need in order to recharge. So just to recap before I wrap up, we identified 3 introvert superpowers. That's working one-on-one and developing those deep and meaningful relationships in a one-to-one context with your major donor. We talked about your ability to deeply focus and concentrate and how that can benefit you in terms of everything from your donor conversations in a busy context to really being able to dive deep into doing that most important work that needs to be prioritized right at this time of year. No matter what kind of busy messages, urgency is happening around you, your real ability to hyper focus is absolutely an introvert strength. And also we talked about your ability to craft irresistible donor opportunities using many of your strengths, including creativity, including strategic thinking, without necessarily, being rigid, being flexible, and how well that works. And we also talked about a couple of strategies to help you manage your energy at this busy time of year, which is very important that you protect these strengths and you protect yourself, and you take good care of yourself and get the downtime that you need so that you're being well and healthy this time of year. So I have been so happy that we had this time together. I want to do more of this because I feel like I barely scratched the surface. So go ahead and make sure you keep in touch. And as we wrap up, come back. I always come in and have a look at the comments. So if you have any additional thoughts as we wrap up, I'd love to hear from you. And thank you again for joining us. Now go out there and leverage those amazing introvert strengths to raise more money for your organization. All right, my friends, and take good care of yourself this busy year-end season. Your introvert needs are just as important as everybody else's. So thank you. We'll talk soon.